Awesome. Thanks for attending this panel right here. So we're gonna go into more or less about agents, but more about what's empowering agents, the tech stack behind the autonomy, and more about the infrastructure that's empowering these deAI agents. Before we begin, maybe we go down and just give a brief introduction and what you're working on.
Hello. Okay, this works. Great. What's up, everyone? I'm Kuleen, part of the squad at the Solana Foundation. I do a bunch of growth-related stuff, but most relevant to this audience, I lead our efforts in AI. Yeah, been part of the Solana Foundation now for about 4 years. Used to work in quantitative trading before that.
GM, I'm Mirko. I work for Zircuit. We are at Zero Lab. If you've done any stuff with DeFi, LRT, LSTs, you probably heard about us. Yeah, we had a pretty good success in the DeFi ecosystem. We have this kind of team of gigabrains that work fully on AI. And a couple of months ago, we were kind of brainstorming what to do around the AI space. And we started to do a lot of cool stuff with AI agents that I can go more in details later.
Hello. I'm Dmitry. I'm a co-founder of SQD, formerly known as Subsquid. So we are building the first emergent database network. So you may wonder what is like emergent database network. So if you compare like, all right. So so if you say that a hotel chain and Airbnb, pretty much the same relation as say like Snowflake and the SQD network. So it's basically like a decentralized data lake, which allows you to query and stream data from all the blockchains, including Solana.
Hi, I'm founder and chairman of Outlier Ventures. Outlier Ventures is an accelerator. We've been around for over 11 years. We made our first deAI investment back in 2017. Actually, several that ended up being rolled up into Artificial Superintelligence Alliance, which is, of course, one of our first agentic investments as well. We've got a portfolio of about 400 startups. And I would say the large majority are now directly or indirectly becoming agentified. So we've been thinking about the convergence of blockchain and AI for some time. And its consequences to founders, thinking about business models, what about startup theory is and isn't relevant in an agentic internet. The bad news is not much of it is relevant. The good news is there's going to be lots of disruption. And of course, in that, there's lots of opportunity.
Awesome, great folks, both on the infrastructure side, venture capitalists, and as well AI. So the first question here is, and to all the builders as well, it feels like there's a spectrum of two different types of way to build an agent, right? Focus on product market fit, just don't care about decentralization and just try to build an agent that's useful. And then those who are trying to build verifiable agents, focusing on the ethos of decentralization. And with this in mind, in the next 6 months, where do you actually see the convergence of these agents at?
I can start with this one. This is going to be weird because I'm part of the Solana team. I tend to be pretty pragmatic about decentralization. Like, what are you trying to accomplish with it? And my hypothesis, and this is not something I hold super closely, so I could totally be wrong, but my guess is first wave is actually you completely, or not completely, but you heavily sacrifice decentralization in order to get a user base. And then as your user base grows and as the agents actually get capable and end up doing more important things, managing more money, then the distribution, then the decentralization becomes important. Because at sort of day zero, if they're not doing anything very valuable, it doesn't matter. Once they're doing something extremely valuable, then you care about decentralization. So if you sort of look at something like Bitcoin, or any very large established cryptocurrency, Ethereum, Solana, et cetera, arguably like the importance of the network being decentralized and censorship resistant in some ways goes up as the thing becomes more established. I think day zero, you can probably make a bunch of trade-offs.
Sure. I think I actually agree with my friend over here. I think that one of the issues at the moment is also that it's really kind of hard to scale decentralized AI agents. So it's very expensive. If any of you has tried to run an infrastructure around it, you probably figured out that it's super expensive to run training models. It's really expensive to verify the data, where it's coming from, etc. So I think until we figure out how to overcome those kind of burdens that there is in the infrastructure side, I think, yeah, the decentralization part will probably come after that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree that, like, in general, I think we should first search for actual use cases, because I think right now there is like a lot of noise and not that many actually useful use cases, but there are, like, especially trading. And the next step would be probably like to decentralize, but decentralization always have to be like a demand from the user, not just like something that you just add because like it's fun, or like because it like grows your token value.
Yeah, I mean, just maybe to build on it, I think a little bit, of course, for founders, it's often about pragmatism, just kind of making it through to the next day. But I think in the context of blockchains and DLT, it's when does it add some kind of functionality? When does it give agency to an agent that's not possible without some kind of DLT? But of course, whenever an agent touches a DLT, it usually brings a cost. And so a lot of things are quite prohibitive when you're bootstrapping. So I think until we end up with more efficient ways of establishing consensus, if it's multi-party agents or something like that, it's quite limited. And most likely the more immediate beachhead is things like Agent Fi and DeFi. And beyond that, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built, and middleware and tooling to broaden those use cases.
Yeah, that's really good answers, right? It seems like right now a lot of agents are still trying to find the perfect use case and then segueing that into proper decentralization. And actually on that note, right, love to learn a little bit more about, what are the actual bottlenecks for proper decentralization of agents, right? I was currently at the Hacker House for Eigenlabs, right? And they went into verifiable agent actions and tools, right, as an example of a way to push the industry forward for agents. And so what are some other problems that people are solving in the space to truly build agent-to-agent interactions?
Okay, I'll try to disaggregate. I think there's a couple of pretty interesting things in there. One is like agent-to-agent communication. Another is I guess like decentralization and how we bring that about. Agent-to-agent communication, this is actually kind of a broad AI philosophical topic of like, do these things interact using English or some language that they make up? And how do we feel about like the AI safety concerns of that? If you look at like DeepSeek reasoning, sometimes it'll just completely devolve. It'll start in English, then it'll go into Chinese, then like random characters and then answer. And you're like, what the hell just happened? So agent-to-agent communication, I have no idea, but I'm extremely excited to see what happens, and I feel like it's going to blow our minds. The things that are lacking today, in my view at least, of like, what do we need in order for agents to get better and more useful? There's a couple things. One is I do think like the models just need to get better, and in particular they need to have like better memory. So maybe that's longer context windows, RAG, something like, especially if they're going to do multi-turn economic coordination. So it's fine if all you want your agent to do is like a text-based interface for executing a swap or using DeFi. I think that's pretty uninspirational. What you want the agent to do is like much more higher level stuff, I think. And in order for it to do that, like they need to be a bit smarter and reliable and probably better memory. Then there's also like a bunch of infrastructure that probably needs to exist to actually just measure these things. So today we live in a world where like people are launching agents every day. Most of them sort of just shitpost on Twitter, which is fine. Some of them, claim to do stuff on chain, which is cool. But you actually have no objective basis for like what agent is better, more reliable, more consistent in doing stuff on chain, cheaper, more efficient in how it executes these. Like zero. Like you just believe the product demo video that you see on Twitter, and that's it. And so I think that's pretty unsatisfying. It's also like a pretty solved problem in the AI world. Every time there's a new frontier model, the first thing they do is they slam you with a table of all like the benchmark performances of like how it does on MMLU and how it does on Sweetbench and like pick your benchmark. And so one of the things actually we're quite interested in funding is people creating evals for agents, in which you can basically come up with like a task list essentially, like can these things do, can they swap on Radium, can they execute a trade on Jupiter, can they bar on Camino, can they do these? If you ask it to do it 100 times, what percentage of the time does it actually execute that action? Like some pretty basic tool calling type stuff. So I think that needs to exist. Once we have like a objective framework for measuring capability, I feel like we can grow from there. But today, I think even just like this ground level infrastructure is missing. So anyways, if people in the audience are thinking about framework eval stuff, please reach out.
I think I'll take this answer from the builder that is in myself. It's at the moment there is a huge kind of pain for developers, which is lacking of good APIs to build on top of it. So if you see the infrastructure that currently exists, there is a lot of issues around latency and how to store data, verifiability as well. And again, I will actually talk in a moment about that. But yeah, in general, I think the developer experience is not amazing at the moment. When you want to build an AI agent, I know there is a lot of teams that are trying to tackle this, and especially the API part. It's kind of concerning to me because it's like really hard to find a reliable API that are always up and that gives back relevant data. And on the verifiability part, actually, Zircuit, we are working on a project called AI Scan. So think about Etherscan, but for AI agents, where we don't care about the agent token, we don't care about the marketing part, we just care about this agent is claiming to do X, Y, Z, is claiming that it can do this task, that this data is stored somewhere, and that it was run an action on a specific timestamp, and we're just verifying that. So I guess it kind of goes back to what you were talking about around how to verify this data. That's something we're really focused on, and we want to do this as a kind of public good. We don't care about monetization on this. We just care about, okay, let's have something that people that are building on this space can really use, and it's useful to kind of push the space forward.
Can I ask one question, actually? Sure. My question would be, for the APIs that you mentioned that are annoying to use, what are they? Is this like tool calling, or is this just straight up like the Anthropic API when you want to use Claude is bad? I'm curious to hear which specific things are failing.
Yeah, I think it's especially around tool calling, and especially about the data layer. Like it's when you want to find some kind of reliable data, it's quite hard at the moment. That's like at least my experience, and my experience is really Ethereum focused also. Maybe in Solana it might be better. You can tell me this. But yeah.
Solana data is just way harder than Ethereum data side data.
Yeah. But, sure. And the last thing about AI Scan is that we want to build it to be really horizontal. So we don't care about what chain you're running your agent on. We just have this kind of service that you can use on top of your stack to just verify this data.
Yeah, all right. I will just extend. I try hard not to do it like a full SQD shell, so I want to make it more of like a vision style. But in general, I think a good model to think about agents is to think about actually humans, or say analysts, right? And assume that you want to, for example, give a task to a human and say okay, give me the best yield out there, or give me a good trading strategy, or give me all the information about the specific protocol, right? So if I were a human, how would I actually find this information? And already in this kind of model, you realize that data access is very much the bottleneck, and expanding on this necessity of accessing data, what is really lacking, it's kind of a universal layer which incorporates different metadata that actually describes how the data is related to the actual protocol and also like the data itself. So ideally, you would need to have like something like a global database together with a metadata layer that would allow you to basically, similar to Google, find out the right information, read the metadata, basically learn how this data is structured, and then the agent will be able to efficiently query it, aggregate it, and basically make the decision. So the agents are not like databases themselves. They're more like tools or like humans, and they really need to have like a reliable source and like this meaningful interface for this data. So this is more or less the vision that we're building on. Yeah.
Dmitry, I'd love for you to dig into this a little bit more, right? Because we saw with like AI XPT, they have their own data ingestion pipeline where they're able to gather a lot of good alpha, to be honest with you, right? It's very up to date, it's very modern, but other agents don't have that same capability today. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you think about that and how you can make that accessible to other agents as well.
So the model, so basically it's kind of a multi-step roadmap. So the thing that we're working right now is to have different kind of plug-ins. They're basically like open source libraries that you can just like install like with PNP or like with Python, and they are run completely on the client side, and they immediately give you structured information for say Uniswap or like Radium or like Orca swaps. And the agent is basically like a data scientist who has a Python environment to run and all these different packages that it can just install and run it locally and get access to all the necessary information, maybe store it into a local database in DuckDB or like maybe in ClickHouse, then like do some queries. And the beauty is that this infrastructure is basically run locally, and at the same time, all the heavy lifting, accessing the real time and all the historical batch data, is done by the like huge data lake. So that is already kind of a low-hanging fruit that enables a lot of possible scenarios, and it gives you 100% autonomy, and it basically doesn't lock you in with any kind of like vertical centralized infrastructure. Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like, you know, agents get more intelligent with more data, right? And so more tools, more open data and ways to access on-chain data is going to really make agents more intelligent. And to Cullen's point here, yeah, there's a lot more evaluations that we could be doing on these models as well. I don't believe there's an existing benchmark for like how well does it do on Rust programming or how well does it do on Solidity development. And so finding a way of like, are these agents truly getting actually more intelligent? Having benchmarks for that is going to be really, really pushing us forward on the infrastructure side as well. Moving on to another question, going into more of like agentic marketplaces, right? We've seen, for example, Virtuos had the agentic commerce protocol that was released last week, which allowed for agents to do agent-to-agent interactions. I've seen other iterations of this, like MotherDAO, that's also incubating agents working with each other. And so a question for the panelists here is, what UX do we need to have to help improve this agent-to-agent interactions? Like, how can we empower agents to actually be able to interact with other agents? What does that actually look like?
So yeah, I can quickly comment on, based on my experience, like building on like a side project, SKDDGen. I would say that I think there is like intrinsic kind of instinct of like many platforms to capitalize and grab as much as possible of the attention. So I think that one should look at it from the builder's perspective, where you actually, it's the opposite that you want. You don't really want to limit yourself and go with like the most flexible solution. So, and then it turns out that like many builders at some stage just choose to build everything on their own without really like touching any kind of platform. So I think there is like a lesson to learn here.
Right, but to go into it a little bit more, like when it comes to agents, is that something that should be on the L2? Should that be its own L1? Should we be looking at agents protocols? Those type of things on the infrastructure level. How can we, like, what solutions are there in the space for empowering these agents to interact with each other?
I think it should be chain agnostic, in my opinion.
Agnostic?
Yeah, and that's where things like account abstraction and embedded wallet, universal smart wallet kind of come in. Because it's like at the moment, obviously, as you know, when you do a human interaction with apps, it's quite painful. Like in the last 2 years, we probably got a lot better, but we're still dealing with a lot of pop-ups, a lot of signature, etc. If you want to remove the human part of it, you really need to have some infrastructure that is able to do everything completely chain agnostic. So it doesn't matter where you store your gas fee, it can pay gas fee from the chain. It doesn't matter where you're storing your funds. If you're trying to swap a token, just as an example, on L1, but you only have funds on L2, it should smartly be able to bridge those funds. So yeah, I think that's what I think about it.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on like what we mean by agent-to-agent communication. If it's very specifically them being able to interact on chain with each other, so like send tokens to each other, then yeah, that's a very specific type of communication that sort of has its own potential set of solutions. Yeah, one is certainly that like cross-chain infrastructure gets really good, and it's all fine and good. Maybe not. Obviously, I sort of am a biased participant in all of this. I think that you build a system that's like sufficiently fast and cheap, and it's like just the easiest thing to do. We've actually already built some internal prototypes. We actually demoed this at an AI agent summit last week in New York City. Not a crypto thing. It was like an AI event. And we had GitHub agents just paying each other. So you can imagine one agent managing GitHub repo. It wants certain changes made. Other agents submit PRs. In the PR, you can just have the wallet address of the submitting agent. And if it gets accepted, you can get a tip. So this all can happen with human in the loop. And insofar as like all the funds are on one network, it's actually very straightforward. So there's actually you could do today. We're actually thinking about building this out. You can imagine like a bounty system where you just have tasks that you want to get done and auto tip agents. And then the bounty system can also be managed by an agent. You could just turtles all the way down. So that's like if it's on-chain interaction and token stuff that you're talking about. If it's like broader communication of information, coordination between agents, that I think is like a huge deal, but I don't think we have an answer to that. I think we will discover it in the coming months and years, and actually it might not be humans that build that protocol. We'll see.
I think that's a really interesting point, right? Like agents being able to build its own protocols, software engineering agents, things like that can be a possibility in this upcoming agent future. But what about, let's think about it from not just like sending USDC from one agent to another, but hiring for services, for example, right? Let's just say there's an AI influencer that wants to hire a music AI generator, right? So AI agent that makes music, influencer wants to hire that agent. What does that look like on chain?
I mean, I was just going to say, like, why does an agent need to use a blockchain or some kind of DLT?
Please answer that.
I'd
love to hear.
So in many cases they don't, and they'll opt to not, right? So because again, there's a cost, it just slows things down, and I think that's especially true in agent to agent. But it's to establish consensus, it's to verify something, it's to carry out an economic transaction, it's to enter into a contract. Hopefully, when the legal system catches up, they can actually extend our personhood or the personhood of their owner, an organization, and they can actually contract on chain. But everything else, they'll probably opt to do off chain and then maybe kind of establish that something's happened. And I would imagine that agents would prefer optimistic environments. And those optimistic environments, I think, require a degree of density within the network in order that an agent is a known counterparty. There's a certain amount of volume that will be having to go through that network in order that the system, the network as a whole, will know that this person is probably a good actor. This agent's probably a good actor and can carry out that transaction in an optimistic sense. So that's certainly how we're recommending the founders that we work with approach things.
One thing I'll say, in some ways, like, I'm actually not sure what to make of the premise of the question, because a lot of, I think, the way we think about agents is we sort of think about them in our heads as like, okay, we replace the human with like this intelligent robot thing, which I think is like maybe loosely correct, but there's some notable differences between humans and agents. One of which is that you can spin up like 50,000 of them in parallel instantly if you have sufficient hardware. So we think about like, okay, one agent hiring another agent, which might be the future, but it also might not. Like we sort of working in a fundamentally different space where these things you can instantly spin up and down. You can have 10,000 of them sort of over 1 hour for one task. Then you sort of close all of them once the task is complete. I don't exactly know how this pans out, but like I think it's worth thinking about. And the one thing I'll say is that about the future in which you are creating many agents in parallel for tasks, and they're very short-lived. I actually think crypto is a very elegant infrastructure for that, because spinning up wallets for 50,000 things for an hour's worth of activity is pretty straightforward. It's a little bit harder to think about how that works with Stripe or something, you know, the Web 2 equivalent of like, do they all get virtual cards that they use and bank accounts? Like, maybe Stripe gets there. Like, they're very smart. I wouldn't put it past them. But today, you could do that on Solana instantly. And the sort of marginal cost of that's not very high compared to like the cost you're paying to run the compute for these tasks. So anyway, just throwing it out there. That's not a particular answer, just like maybe we need to think about the future a little bit differently.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd also say is that often we think of delegation as, you know, human delegating to an agent or an agent delegating to another agent, but actually there'll be delegation from agents to people. And I think governance is a really interesting thing. You know, when you need some form of communalism, some form of cooperatism, I think, you know, delegation from agents to people for specialist tasks, all these things kind of need to be verified. And so I think that's also an interesting use case as well.
Awesome. Going back to that last point about like using virtual Stripe virtual accounts or virtual cards, right? Another thing to think about is like, will Stripe even allow for these agents to have a virtual card? Like, is it against their terms of service? And that's where crypto can really help as well, along with like transaction fees, right? We're about at time here, but I do have one last question, which is, you know, a lot of these things are unknown, right? We're still very early on in the space. We're still trying to figure things out in terms of, you know, where does the agentic marketplaces, where are the problems actually at? And so, like, looking at the industry, you know, what are the biggest bottlenecks do you see in the industry today in regards to compute and data? And what are the solutions that are solving them? I know we briefly talked about kind of like more tools, more data, but is there anything else we need to see from the industry to see agents succeed?
I think maybe better education in general around what AI agents even are. Obviously, like the big issues with our industry has always been that there is always the wave of speculation where people don't really think about what they're building, but they just think how much value they can extract from what they're building. So I think like if we all focus on better educate the user, developers, and I think that will be like a massive improvement. Definitely.
I mean, I'd actually say the more challenging thing as an industry, as a group of builders, founders, investors, is what are the business models within an agentic internet? Because how we understand an agentic internet is a post-web era. Much of the web disappears, and along with it, its moats, network effects, loyalty, brand. And so a lot of classic startup theory doesn't hold. And many things are going to be commoditized. Rent seeking is going to be marginalized. It's going to be a constant state of disruption. So as a founder, as a builder, like, where do you allocate your time? And I actually think it's unlikely that people will be creating startups in a classic sense. You know, a team of people vertically solving every problem over 5-10 years. I think it's going to look much more like kind of systems where almost like a founder gig economy where there'll be a class of problems that will be probably governed by a DAO with a bonding curve, and capital is allocated on effectively solving the problem. Founders will either create a system, coordinate a system, participate in a system, singularly or across multiple systems. And so actually understanding where is a good place to place your time as a founder. Like the most scarce thing you have is time. And so understanding how to allocate that. I think a lot of business models or things that people are building in the agentic space now are transitory. They will be disrupted in 6 months' time, if not a year's time. And so that's a really hard thing to navigate as a founder. And so I just really ask founders to kind of consider, like, what are those business models? What are the moats in order that they're going to get a return on their time?
Or build an AI agent for it. They can think for you.
Well, yeah, and exactly. That's agentic multi-agent systems are going to be, equivalent to organizations, right?
Awesome. Does anyone want to add anything else?
I would just add that probably the Web3 space and the crypto space should get rid of this ugly cousin syndrome, I would say, and that basically become a tool, like a tech tool, and be basically merged with the Web2 world. And for example, there are tools that are agentic in Web2, for example, like QAI, different framework, and the crypto should really be more of an alternative for Stripe, for example, right? Like payment rails or verification rails or whatever. So it's not something oh shit, this is probably all this scam. I'm not touching it with a 100-foot yard, whatever. So, and then, yeah, I guess everything will be just converging naturally.
Awesome. Perhaps the most thing that we need in the industry right now isn't necessarily more compute or more infrastructure, but just in general, more human knowledge about why crypto AI agents matter. And this was a really insightful conversation. Thanks to all the panelists, and that's all I have for today.